The prison station of Cathara 9 floated in the emptiness between dying suns, a place where the universe sent things it wanted to forget. Abandoned warships, broken relics, and creatures too dangerous to destroy but too costly to keep were all dumped here, left to decay in silence. Deep within the station's lowest chamber, behind walls thick enough to withstand starfire, something magnificent had been reduced to a shadow of legend. The dragon called Saravoth lay motionless on the cold metal floor, her body skeletal beneath scales that once shimmered like molten rubies. Her wings, massive enough to eclipse moons, hung limp against her sides, torn membranes barely clinging to ancient bone. The chains around her neck had long since rusted into her flesh, but she no longer struggled against them. Struggle required hope, and hope had died 300 cycles ago when her rider never returned. The guards who monitored the upper levels whispered stories about the beast below. Some claimed she was already dead, preserved only by the station's stasis field. Others insisted they still heard her breathing sometimes, a hollow sound like wind through abandoned cathedrals. But no one dared to check. The record said she was a weapon of mass destruction, a creature that had leveled cities with a single breath. Better to let her rot in peace than risk waking whatever fury might still smolder in her chest. Jenna Torres was not supposed to be there. The maintenance roster had assigned her to the water filtration systems on Level 3, not the restricted zones that required clearance she did not possess. But when the environmental sensors started showing impossible readings from the Forgotten Sector, her curiosity overwhelmed her caution. At 19 years old, she was the youngest engineer on Cathara 9, sent there as punishment for asking too many questions during her academy training. Her supervisors hoped the isolation would teach her obedience. Instead, it only sharpened her determination to uncover truth. She crawled through ventilation shafts barely wide enough for her shoulders, following the heat signature that made no sense. The deeper she went, the colder everything became, yet her scanner insisted something warm existed at the center of all that ice. When she finally emerged into the chamber, dropping down through a ceiling grate held together by nothing but rust and stubborn metal memory, she expected to find a reactor malfunction or perhaps a nest of thermal parasites. What she found stole the breath from her lungs. The dragon was impossibly large, even curled into herself like a dying star. Jenna had seen pictures of the war beasts in historical archives, but no image could capture the terrible beauty of seeing one in person. Saravoth's scales, though dulled by neglect, still held traces of crimson fire beneath the gray. Her claws, each one longer than Jenna was tall, rested on the ground with the gentleness of something that had forgotten how to fight. But it was the dragon's eyes that truly broke Jenna's heart. They were open, staring at nothing, filled with a grief so profound it seemed to have weight. Tears had long since carved paths down the dragon's snout, leaving crystallized tracks that caught the dim emergency lights. Around her neck, the collar dug deep, inscribed with words in a language Jenna recognized from her studies. Property of the 7th Fleet. Authorized writer, Captain Niva Thorne. She had read about Thorne in her military history classes. The captain had been a legend, a human who somehow bonded with one of the alien war dragons during the Contact Wars, turning the tide of battle through their unprecedented partnership. But Thorne had disappeared during the final assault on the enemy's stronghold, declared missing in action, presumed dead. No one had ever mentioned what happened to her dragon. Jenna approached slowly, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The dragon did not react. She did not even blink. Jenna could see the gentle rise and fall of her chest, so slight it was almost imperceptible, the bare minimum of life. Scattered around the chamber were feeding stations all untouched. Medical drones lay dormant in corners, their batteries long dead from disuse. Someone had tried to care for Saravoth once, but eventually they had given up. "Hey there," Jenna whispered, her voice small and uncertain. "Can you hear me?" Nothing. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Jenna circled the dragon carefully, noting the injuries that had never properly healed. The wing membranes torn beyond natural recovery. The scars that spoke of battles fought across galaxies. She found an old terminal covered in dust and managed to coax it to life. The screen flickered, showing corrupted files from decades past. Most were unreadable, but one video file remained intact. She pressed play. The footage was grainy, shot from a helmet camera during combat. Flames filled the screen as ships exploded in the background. Through the chaos, Jenna could hear a woman's voice, strong and clear despite the surrounding destruction. Saravoth, evasive pattern 7. Protect the civilian transports at all costs. The camera angle shifted, revealing a glimpse of the dragon in flight. Magnificent and terrible. Crimson fire streaming from her jaws as she carved through enemy formations. The woman's laughter cut through the battle sounds, wild and fierce and utterly alive. That's my girl. Just like we practiced. Then the transmission degraded into static. The final clear words were barely audible. I love you, Sarah. If I don't make it back, remember me. Remember us. The screen went dark. Jenna stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. She looked at the dragon, truly looked at her, and suddenly understood. Saravoth was not dying from neglect or injury or age. She was dying from a broken heart, from waiting day after day, year after year for a voice that would never call her name again. The dragon had chosen this slow fade, this quiet surrender, because living without her rider was a torture worse than any wound. Jenna wiped her eyes roughly and made a decision that would change everything. She walked directly in front of the dragon and knelt down, making herself small and vulnerable. Captain Thorne isn't coming back, she said softly. I know you know that. I know you've known it for a long time. The dragon's eyes remained fixed on nothing, but you're still here. And I think maybe there's a reason for that. Jenna reached into her pocket and pulled out her own ID badge, the one with her name and photo and the service record that marked her as insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. She placed it on the ground between them. My name is Jenna. I'm nobody special. I fix broken things for a living. And you are the most broken thing I have ever seen. She stood up and stepped back, giving the dragon space. I am going to come back tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. I do not know if you care. I do not know if you can even hear me anymore. But I am going to try anyway, because giving up on you feels like giving up on every good thing that ever mattered. Jenna turned to leave, climbing back toward the ventilation shaft. She had almost reached it when she heard something. A sound so faint she almost dismissed it as imagination. It was a breath, deeper than the others, followed by the smallest shift of scales against metal. When she looked back, one of Saravoth's eyes had moved, tracking her movement with the barest hint of focus. It was not much. It was barely anything at all. But it was more than nothing, and nothing was what Jenna had expected. She smiled, tears streaming down her face, and climbed back to the world above. In the chamber below, Saravoth closed her eyes for the first time in months. And deep within her chest, where hope had long since turned to ash, a single ember flickered. Jenna returned the next night with a backpack full of supplies she had stolen from the medical bay. Nutrient packs, thermal blankets, cleaning solutions, anything she thought might help. She knew the dragon probably would not eat or drink, but bringing nothing felt like accepting defeat before even trying. The crawl through the ventilation system was easier this time, her body remembering the route even as her mind raced with doubt. Saravoth had not moved. She lay in the same position, wings folded, head resting on scarred talons, eyes open but unseeing. Jenna's heart sank a little, though she refused to let disappointment stop her. She set up a small work area in one corner, organizing her supplies with the methodical precision of someone who needed tasks to keep panic at bay. I brought some things, Jenna said aloud, narrating her actions like she was back in training, explaining procedures to an absent instructor, medical-grade nutrient solution. It is supposed to work for most carbon-based life forms, though I admit the label says nothing about dragons. Also, some catalyzer fluid, in case your systems need a boost. And I have water. Clean water. Not the recycled stuff they give us workers, but the good kind from the officer's reserve. I may lose my job over that theft, but I figure if I am already breaking about 17 regulations, what is one more? She talked as she worked, cleaning the space around the dragon with careful attention. Decades of dust and debris had accumulated, mixed with shed scales and the remnants of failed medical interventions. Jenna gathered it all, sorting through what might be important and discarding the rest. She found fragments of Thorne's personal effects scattered throughout the chamber. A broken communicator, a torn flight jacket, a hologram projector still, containing images of the captain and her dragon in better days, their bond evident in every frame. Jenna activated the projector, letting the images play across the chamber walls. Thorne appeared larger than life, grinning at the camera with windswept hair, and eyes that sparkled with mischief. Saravoth stood behind her, majestic and proud, her scales gleaming like liquid fire. The two of them looked invincible together, like nothing in the universe could break them apart. "She was something special, your rider," Jenna said quietly. "I read about her in school. They taught us she was a hero, but they never explained what that cost. They never told us about you." She paused, watching the images cycle through moments of joy, training sessions, quiet moments of connection. "I think they should have. I think people should know that heroes leave pieces of themselves behind, and sometimes those pieces keep breathing even after everything else stops." For hours, Jenna simply sat beside the dragon, talking about everything and nothing. She described her childhood on the agricultural colony of Greenholm, where she had first looked up at the stars and wanted to understand how they worked. She talked about her family, her younger brother who still sent her messages even though responses took weeks to travel. She explained her theories about quantum mechanics and her frustrations with the narrow-minded thinking of her academy instructors. "They said I asked too many questions," she admitted with a bitter laugh. "Apparently good engineers just follow orders and fix what they are told to fix, but I cannot help it. When I see something broken, I need to understand why. I need to know what went wrong so I can figure out how to make it right." She looked at Saravoth, at the magnificent ruin of her. "You are the biggest puzzle I have ever encountered, and I do not think the answer is mechanical. I think it is something else entirely." As the night wore on, Jenna began reading aloud from her personal collection of books, stories she had downloaded onto her tablet to combat the loneliness of Cathara 9. She read about ancient Earth, about oceans and forests that existed before humanity reached the stars. She read poetry about loss and recovery, about the stubborn persistence of life even in impossible circumstances. Her voice grew hoarse, but she kept going, desperate to fill the silence with something other than despair. Near dawn, as she prepared to leave before the shift change made her absence noticeable, Jenna noticed something different. The dragon's breathing had deepened, falling into a rhythm that suggested actual sleep rather than the half-death trance she had maintained before. One wing had shifted slightly, as if some unconscious part of Saravoth's mind had responded to the warmth of another living presence. "I will be back tonight," Jenna promised, gathering her supplies. "I know you probably do not care, but I do, and I am stubborn enough for both of us." She climbed back through the ventilation shaft, her body aching but her spirit strangely lighter. Behind her, in the depths of the forgotten chamber, Saravoth's eyes flickered, not opening, but moving, beneath closed lids tracking the echoes of dreams she had thought lost forever. For the next week, Jenna established a routine. She worked her official shifts with mechanical efficiency, doing just enough to avoid suspicion. Then, as soon as darkness fell across the station's artificial cycle, she disappeared into the ventilation system with her backpack and determination. Each night she brought something new. Music files recovered from old archives, recordings of natural sounds, rain and wind, and the calls of creatures from 100 different worlds. The smell of growing things, smuggled from the station's hydroponics bay in sealed containers. She also brought her own work. Unable to help herself, Jenna started documenting everything about Saravoth. She measured her vital signs with portable equipment, recording temperature fluctuations and respiratory patterns. She photographed her, scales noting their composition and the way they seemed to contain trapped light even in their diminished state. She studied the old battle footage obsessively, trying to understand the mechanics of how dragon and rider had moved together with such perfect synchronization. What she discovered amazed her. The bond between Thorne and Saravoth had not been merely emotional or trained. There were biological markers, chemical signatures that suggested a deep neurological connection. When they flew together, their nervous systems had somehow synchronized, creating a feedback loop that enhanced both their capabilities. They had literally become one entity with two bodies, sharing thoughts and sensations in ways that transcended language. And when Thorne died, that connection had been severed like cutting a live wire. Saravoth had felt her rider's death not as distant information, but as a fundamental breaking of her own existence. The dragon was not just grieving, she was experiencing the phantom pain of a missing limb that had once been part of her soul. "No wonder you stopped eating," Jenna whispered, scrolling through her data analysis. It must feel like dying yourself over and over, every moment you are still alive without her. She looked up at the dragon, and for the first time Saravoth was looking back. Both eyes were open, focused, tracking Jenna's movements with an awareness that had been absent before. The dragon's expression was unreadable, but something in the tilt of her head suggested interest, or perhaps recognition of being truly seen. Jenna's breath caught. She set down her tablet slowly and approached on instinct, moving with the careful respect one might show to something sacred and fragile. "Hi," she said simply. "You are awake." Saravoth did not respond, but her gaze never wavered. Up close, Jenna could see the intelligence burning in those ancient eyes, dulled by suffering but not extinguished. She could see the question there, the terrible weight of it. "Why are you here?" "Because you matter," Jenna answered aloud, though no words had been spoken. "Because letting you fade away in this forgotten place is wrong. Because Captain Thorne would want someone to remember what you were, what you still are, beneath all this pain." The dragon's nostrils flared, tasting the air, analyzing the strange human who kept returning. Jenna held her ground, letting herself be examined. After a long moment, Saravoth shifted, a small movement but significant. She turned her head slightly, exposing the rusted collar that had cut into her neck for so many years. It was not quite an invitation, but it was not rejection either. Jenna understood. She retrieved her tools and approached the collar with shaking hands. "This is going to hurt," she warned softly. "But it needs to come off. You are not anyone's property. Not anymore." It took 3 hours of careful work, using cutting tools not meant for such delicate operation. The collar had fused with scales and flesh, requiring precision to remove without causing more damage. Saravoth trembled throughout, but never pulled away, never used her strength to stop the process. When the collar finally fell away with a heavy clang, a wound was revealed underneath, deep and infected, festering for years. Jenna cleaned it with antiseptic that made the dragon hiss, a sound like escaping steam. But as she worked, applying regenerative gel and bandages adapted from human medical supplies, she felt something impossible. A warmth spread from her hands, where they touched scales, and for just a moment, she sensed an emotion that was not her own, gratitude, and beneath it, the faintest spark of something that might have been hope. "There," Jenna said, stepping back to examine her work. "Better?" Saravoth lowered her head slowly, bringing her massive snout close to Jenna's face. They stayed, like that for several heartbeats, human and dragon breathing the same air. Then so gently it barely registered, the dragon pressed her forehead against Jenna's chest right over her heart. It was the first deliberate touch in 300 cycles, and in that moment of connection, Jenna felt the echo of a voice she had never heard, yet somehow recognized. "Thank you." The change in Saravoth did not happen overnight, but it happened. Jenna continued her nightly visits, and gradually the dragon began responding in small ways. She would lift her head when Jenna arrived, tracking her movements with clear interest. Her breathing strengthened, no longer the shallow gasps of something waiting to die. The wound from the collar started healing, new scales growing in with a faint shimmer that hinted at her former glory. But it was the moment Saravoth finally ate that changed everything. Jenna had been trying for weeks, offering different types of nutrition, from standard protein rations to exotic compounds she synthesized in secret, using the station's limited chemistry lab. Nothing worked until she remembered reading about dragons in mythology, creatures drawn not to mere food, but to elements, to minerals and metals that fueled their internal fires. She started bringing pieces of the station itself, broken components rich in rare elements, laying them out like offerings. One night, as she arranged fragments of quantum drive casings, she heard a sound that made her freeze, the scrape of claws against metal. She turned slowly and found Saravoth sitting upright, fully upright for the first time since they had met. The dragon's neck extended, her head lowering to examine the pieces Jenna had brought. Then with deliberate care she picked up a fragment of titanium alloy and swallowed it. Jenna held her breath. Saravoth's throat glowed faintly, internal heat processing the metal. The dragon's eyes brightened, scales beginning to shimmer as energy returned to systems long dormant. She consumed another piece, then another, eating slowly but purposefully. When she finished, she looked at Jenna with something that might have been satisfaction, or perhaps amusement at the human's stunned expression. "You needed metal," Jenna said, laughing with relief and wonder. "Of course you needed metal. Your whole biology is built around processing high-energy compounds. Standard food would never work." The dragon rumbled, a sound that vibrated through the floor. Not quite a purr, not quite a growl, but something in between that felt almost like communication. Jenna grinned and immediately started planning. If Saravoth could eat again, if her strength returned, then maybe, just maybe, other things were possible too. The next weeks became a carefully orchestrated secret. Jenna raided the station's salvage yards, taking damaged components that would not be missed, bringing them to feed the dragon whose appetite grew with her returning strength. She documented everything, filling her personal logs with observations that amazed her. Saravoth was not just surviving. She was beginning to heal in ways that seemed impossible. The tears in her wing membrane slowly knitted together. Old scars faded. The dullness in her scales gave way to hints of that legendary crimson fire. But physical healing was only part of the transformation. The deeper change came in the relationship building between human and dragon. Jenna had no formal training in dragon bonding, no guidance from the military protocols that had governed Thorne's partnership with Saravoth. She had only intuition and genuine care, and somehow, that was enough. She started bringing her work into the chamber, sitting beside Saravoth while analyzing station systems or studying engineering problems. The dragon would watch, occasionally making soft sounds that Jenna came to interpret as opinions. When Jenna was frustrated, Saravoth would lower her head, offering a silent comfort that needed no words. When Jenna succeeded in solving a difficult puzzle, the dragon's scales would brighten, sharing in the achievement. One night, Jenna brought her music player and headphones. On impulse, she placed the headphones near Saravoth's head and played the song she had been listening to during her loneliest moments on the station, a haunting melody about finding light in darkness. The dragon's eyes closed, her entire body relaxing in a way Jenna had never seen before. Music, it seemed, was a universal language. But their secret could not last forever. 3 months into their hidden friendship, alarms screamed through Cathara 9. Jenna was in the middle of her regular shift when the emergency lights started flashing, accompanied by warnings in multiple languages. "Unknown vessel approaching. All personnel to defensive positions." Jenna's blood ran cold. She abandoned her post and ran, not toward the designated shelter, but down toward the forgotten sectors. If the station was under attack, if weapons were deployed, Saravoth was in danger. The forgotten chamber was not shielded against modern armaments. She could be killed without anyone even knowing she still lived. She burst through the ventilation shaft and dropped into the chamber, breathing hard. "Sarah, we have to go. There is a ship coming, and I do not know what they want. But if they start shooting, this whole section might collapse." Saravoth stood, fully upright now, her height towering over Jenna. The dragon's scales glowed with building energy, her body coiled and ready. But there was a problem. The chamber doors had been sealed for decades. The mechanisms were rusted beyond function. Even if Saravoth had the strength to break through, which Jenna suspected she now did, the station's structural integrity would be compromised. They would doom everyone aboard, unless there was another way. Jenna pulled up station schematics on her tablet, hands shaking as explosions began rocking the outer hull. The attacking ship was not military. Its profile matched nothing in any database, suggesting pirates or perhaps something worse. She traced routes through the station, looking for any path wide enough for a dragon. "The main hangar," she said suddenly. "There is an emergency evacuation tunnel that connects the lower sectors to the launch bays. It was designed for moving large equipment during the war. If we can reach it, if you can fly, we might be able to get you out." Saravoth's gaze fixed on her, intense and searching. Then the dragon did something that stole Jenna's breath. She lowered her body, wings spreading in a posture Jenna had seen in the old videos, the same stance Thorne's dragon had taken before her rider mounted. "No," Jenna breathed. "Sarah, I am not a pilot. I do not have training. I cannot bond with you the way Captain Thorne did," the dragon rumbled, insistent. Another explosion shook the station, closer now. Debris rained from the ceiling. Time was running out. Jenna looked into Saravoth's eyes and saw not just a request, but a truth. The dragon was choosing this. After 300 cycles of grief and isolation, after months of healing through the strange companionship of an untrained human engineer, Saravoth was ready to live again. But not alone. Never alone again. Okay, Jenna whispered, climbing onto the dragon's back with shaking limbs. Okay, let us do this. The moment she settled between Saravoth's shoulder blades, gripping scales that felt like warm metal, something clicked into place. Not the full neurological bond that Thorne had shared with her dragon, but something new. Something built on trust and care rather than military conditioning. Jenna felt the dragon's heartbeat syncing with her own, felt the ancient consciousness reaching out to her mind with gentle curiosity. Together, they ran through corridors too small, through spaces never meant for something of Saravoth's size. The dragon moved with impossible grace, her body flowing like liquid fire around obstacles. Jenna clung tight, trusting completely, until they burst through into the main hangar where chaos reigned. Station personnel scattered, screaming at the sight of the war dragon they thought long dead. Security forces raised weapons, but before they could fire, Saravoth leaped, wings unfurling with a sound like thunder. She caught the air and climbed, powerful strokes carrying them through the hangar bay and out into space. The attacking ship loomed ahead, weapons charging, but Saravoth was done being a victim. She opened her jaws and breathed fire for the first time in centuries. Crimson flames that burned without oxygen, fed by her internal fusion. The blast struck the pirate ship dead center, not destroying it but disabling its weapons, giving Cathara 9 time to mount a proper defense. Jenna held on, tears streaming down her face inside her emergency oxygen mask, as the dragon she had saved now saved everyone else. They flew through the battle like legends reborn, Saravoth's movements guided by Jenna's engineer mind, calculating trajectories and weak points. The two of them working together in imperfect but beautiful harmony. When the pirates retreated and the station was safe, Saravoth circled back, landing gently in the hangar. The station commander stood waiting, weapons lowered, eyes wide with disbelief. Jenna slid down from the dragon's back, exhausted and exhilarated. Explanation? The commander demanded. Jenna straightened, meeting his gaze. Her name is Saravoth. She was Captain Thorne's partner. She has been down there alone for decades and nobody cared. But she is not a weapon. She is not property. She is alive, and she matters. The commander looked at the dragon, then at the young engineer, then back at the dragon who stood protectively beside her human. Finally, he lowered his weapon completely. What are you proposing? He asked quietly. Jenna reached up, touching Saravoth's scales. I am proposing we do better. I am proposing we remember that bonds like this are worth protecting. I am proposing that sometimes the most broken things can heal if someone cares enough to try. High above them, through the hangar's opening, stars shone cold and distant. But here, in the space between human and dragon, warmth existed that had been thought impossible. A new bond forged not in war but in compassion. A second chance for both of them. Saravoth lowered her head, touching Jenna's shoulder gently. And in that moment, everyone watching understood. The age of war dragons had not ended. It had simply evolved into something no one expected, something better. Together they would fly into whatever came next, not as master and weapon, but as partners who had chosen each other freely, as friends who refused to let the past dictate the future, as hope rising from the ashes of grief. The end was just the beginning.